I'll tell you a little bit about the program so you know why you're here, I guess. Science on Tap is a cooperative. It's brought to you by the Flathead Lake Biological Station, the Flathead Lakers, and the brewing company here. And it's essentially an opportunity for people who use science in their work and people who do research and use science in a meaningful and productive way to come and talk about how they do that. We've had a lot of different types of speakers over the I guess almost 2.5 years now that we've been doing it. Tonight is pretty special, I think, because we're going to talk a lot about a real world problem that is very near and dear, and how science is used to sort of mitigate that problem and how to be aware of that problem. And sometimes we have speakers that come in and talk about a pretty, a pretty narrow perspective on some very fine detail that we're dealing with. Like last month when I spoke about my work in Antarctica, there's not really it doesn't hit too close to home, but this one should. This one should grab everybody right by the ears, and we should listen carefully. A couple housekeeping orders of business here. Every beer that gets bought from 5 to 8 tonight gives the Lakers and the biostation $1 to split, and that ends up fueling a whole bunch of work that we get done, like the Science on Tap website. It offers, sometimes when there's not 35 speakers, an opportunity for dinner. We try to treat the speakers that come in well and make it worth their while. So I guess we're drinking for cause but responsibly tonight. So much appreciated, and thank you to the brewery for that. It's a really great gesture. How many folks in here are Flathead Laker members? All right, that's a lot of people. That's really good to see. There's some debate up front if they're members or not. You're probably not then, if you have to think about it. Usually my wife is here to discuss Lakers business. She is the education outreach coordinator for the Flathead Lakers, Hillary. Unfortunately, she's ill this evening. She's rough year for colds, I think. I think everybody knows that. She lasted a while, but it took her now. So she's in a rough shape. But she's here in spirit, and she wanted me to tell you, if you're not a Laker member, you should honestly consider joining the Lakers. And anybody who just raised their hand, would you put your hands up again, Lakers members? Do we have any board members? There we go. There's Betty. All right. You're hiding back there. If you wouldn't mind, you could talk to Betty more about joining the Lakers if you're interested. They do a lot of amazing work keeping the lake clean, educating about the threats of invasive mussels and other invasive species, and generally doing a good job educating why Flathead Lake is such an important part of our community. That's a good plug. You can tell Hillary I did well. One other thing that the Lakers and the biostation have been working on a bit that I want to bring up tonight, this is sort of the unveiling, but it's to a good group of folks, is we're working on a citizen science program. There's an organization out there, I don't know if organization is the right word, there is a project, we'll call it, that looks all over the country at Secchi disc depths. Anybody here want to venture what a Secchi disc depth is? Tom Bansack, Assistant Director of the Flathead Biostation, raises his hand. Anybody else? Oh. It's a little disc.
It's black and white quadrants and lowered into the water.
Exactly. That was about the best definition you can get. It's a disc that offers a pretty vivid coloration that you drop down and you can see how clear your water is. There's a thing called the Great Secchi Dip-In, and it takes place in July across the country. And essentially what it is it's a chance for folks to go out and take some water quality measurements as part of a bigger sort of crowdsourced effort to examine water quality across the nation. And Flathead Lake doesn't really register on this national database, so I hope to change that, and the Lakers hope to change that with a citizen science initiative where for a nominal fee and a participation cost, you get a Secchi disc, and you get to go out to your favorite place on Flathead Lake and measure water clarity, and then report the data either back to us or straight to this bigger organization. There's a website out there, it's the Great Flathead Dip-In, I believe, something like that. If you search for that, it'll come up. But there's some information. We're going to start pestering all of you that are on our mailing lists about joining up, because it's an opportunity for me to learn more about water clarity around Flathead Lake, of which we don't know very much, and it gives us a chance to sort of look at a spatial dynamic that would not be possible otherwise. And that will be coming at you through all sorts of social media and email blasts. So please look for it and please consider participating. Any other things? Oh, Science on Tap is real relaxed. We've got new folks here. You have to understand this is a crowded room, but we all need beer, right? So if you need a beer, there we go. Hey, I need a beer. That's all you gotta do. Just give them a little nod, give them a wave, mouth what kind of beer you want. Take what you get, I suppose. And we'll work on the sort of apologies after the fact, right? I think we've got a power panel tonight. We've got a lot to get through. I'm going to say up front, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves as they come up. Speakers, good deal? Yep. All right, and we're going to get through, we're going to talk about fire in northwest Montana. I'd ask you all to hold your questions. We're going to have a long Q&A at the end of all of this, but we've got so much to get through that I worry if we take questions along the way, we'll stagger on and you'll have too many beers and then we'll get messy. So I guess I'd like to give a round of applause to our panel tonight. We have some great experts. Thank you very much.
All right, like Sean said, thank you all for being here this evening. This is, I think wildfire is a topic on everybody's mind these days as we're entering another fire season. We do have a bunch of people here this evening. We're going to start off with a little bit of fire history in the greater Big Fork area. And that's going to be Rick Trembath. Rick Trembath is a student of fire. I think he started on the Flathead Hotshot crew in the 70s. He's been involved with fire ever since. On teams, he teaches wildfire classes at the FECC. He's been engaged all up until last season, and I'm sure he will be this season as well. So we're breaking it up into about 20-minute sections. There'll be a little bit of a break in between. I'm going to follow up. My name is Allie Olwelling, and I do wildfire prevention and education. Thank you. Wildfire prevention, education, and information for the DNRC here in Kalispell. And then, after me, we are going to invite the Swan District of the Flathead National Forest. So these are your neighbors right across the road. We have the Fire Management Officer, Brent Olson. We have the Assistant Fire Management Officer of Operations, Brett Hardman. And we have the Assistant Fire Management Officer of Fuels, Jake Jarasek. So I want you to know that we work together, we talk to each other. This is interagency, this is cooperative. This is how wildfire is in the Flathead Valley. And we're going to start it off with Rick. Here you go.
Okay, so I'm going to start it off with what fire was all about on the landscape around here historically. You can see a little fire there up to the left and a big fire to the right. And we've had a lot of fire in between that. So let's see if I can advance. So the I'll get the hang of this. The Native Americans is where we have to go back to pre-European influence, because for centuries the Native Americans, the indigenous people, influenced significantly the amount of fire and the kind of fire on our landscape. This clicker isn't working very good. So the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribe just south of us has done an awful lot of historical knowledge, traditional knowledge compilations, and they really did use fire significantly for food production, animal management, travel, making travel easier, and a myriad of other uses. They're still using fire. They're still doing burning, but not to the extent that they used to. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So some of the uses for mushrooms, for huckleberry production, for camas fall production, for food and substance, they burned a lot. So if you want more information about that, the Confederated Salish Kootenai website has a really good portrayal of what that was all about. But on the bottom of that last sentence, in many areas the tribal people more than doubled the frequency of natural lightning fire. So there was no suppression of fire with the indigenous people. They didn't suppress any wildfires like we do today. In fact, they lit a lot more fire on the landscape. So the first scientific, so to speak, study of this area was in conjunction with the U.S. Geological Survey in the late 1800s. And the Flathead Forest Reserve and the Lewis and Clark Forest Reserve were examined. And it took a whole year for each one of those by an individual riding around on a horse, looking at the land, writing down what his observations were, and trying to understand what was going on. But some of the observations are very different than what you might expect. There was a lot of fire that had just gone through the landscapes. So here east of Whitefish, above the lake, that big mountain, 8 square miles have been burned over recently. And all of those fires were the severe stand replacement fires. They weren't the little fires here in the valley bottom, but in the last 25 years. So these are pictures taken from 1889 in the Flathead Valley, Swan Valley, and this is the portrayal of what our valleys used to look like. They were big, large trees, large and ponderosa pine with almost no brush underneath them, mostly grass, and that was because there was a lot of light intensity fire. In the Lewis and Clark Reserve Survey, notice Big Fork, between Big Fork and Yellow Bay, and way down there to the right, the indication is that whole area has been recently burned within the last 25 years. So only areas recently burned or those overrun by fire within the last 4 years have been shown on the map. So it suggests that we had a lot of fire use on the land, and it was probably by the indigenous peoples to better themselves with their horse use and grazing. Let me back up here. But the estimation by the researcher was that 1,420 square miles, or about a third of the reserve, had been recently burned. So the reserve was about 3 million acres, so that would have been about 1 million acres had been burned in the last 25 years or so. And some pictures more up there by Holland Lake and down in the valley bottom. All of those pictures show this kind of an environment. So down by Sealy Lake, there's a recently restored larch habitat type down there that Tim Love, the ranger down there, helped do. But anyway, that has the world's largest larch. And the reason that it is still thriving is because it can withstand fire. It's got about maybe 6 to 8 inches of bark, and it'll take fire very, very well. But not real intense fire. If that had all been crowded by conifers or fir trees, then it would have killed that tree. So we read about a lot of different things here. Just a lot of fire. The historic evidence around Big Fork, which is still there, shows this large stump having a tremendous fire history. That's out there by Swan River School on Old Main Trail. And all of those little arrows indicate a fire frequency or a fire event of low intensity fire. Similarly, just in back of us up here on Chapman Hill, there's a ponderosa pine stump that shows the same thing. In there, you see all those arrows? Those are individual fire events, and there hasn't been a fire in either one of those places probably for the last 100 years. And the ground has changed to being agricultural and different things. Right on the shore of Flathead Lake shows a large. So this is historic. Whoops. See if I can back up here. So let's try this again. This is supposed to show you. See that little fire going through there? That's what fire was all about in the valley bottoms. And then with fire exclusion and suppression, we end up with fuel load buildup, and we end up with fire then that has a lot more intensity, and it tends to burn things hotter and more intensely. So this is what low intensity fire looks like out on the ground. This is a vacuum fire. Really not going to kill many of those trees unless they're maybe lodgepole or thin bark trees. And it would go day and night, and it would travel when the weather, dictated, and it would come and go, and it was just part of the landscape. The same thing as probably thunderstorms or wind vents or whatever. It was part of everyday life. On the east shore of Flathead Lake, there was in 1998 a fire history study done by fire ecologist Steve Barrett. And what he found was that the historic record indicated that there was a lot of fire, maybe on a 10 to 35 to 40, 50-year basis, depending on your exact spot there. And we haven't had a fire on the east shore now since probably the 20s or the 30s on the north side here by Mosaic Creek. That's the cookies that I passed around. They show the different fire events, and we've just excluded that. And it's a kind of a scientific venture to really study that. You build a tree ring master chronology and work with your indicators of where fire is in the data record of growth rings. On Crane Lookout, which is just up here on the north end of Crane Mountain, there was a lot of intensive research on a 45-acre parcel that just shows the frequency of fire events to the left, and then suppressed fire in 1920s on. There's just no fire events there. So what's this all saying is that we had fire in that area every 16 years on an average, and we haven't had one, for the last almost 100 years. So this is my career. I put out a lot of these little lightning strikes up there on Crane Mountain, and as a result, I'm giving these three guys in the corner a tremendous challenge, because we have built up a tremendous fuel load up there. And a lot of those fires were pretty easy to put out because they would have only smoldered and they would have only burned during those wet years. It's really pretty easy to put out a fire in July when the fuels are nice and wet. In fact, you have to go up there quickly sometimes before they'll go out. But this is what we have right now. This is the kind of fuel loading that we have up there, and when that burns on August 8th, that's going to it's going to be very intense. So this is my fear, I guess, is that we don't fully understand the ramifications of what we're doing out there necessarily with totally suppressing all fire. Where there was once a large stump, now there's 40 or 50 stumps and lots of fuel. Similarly, in emissions, there's just not, all these studies show that. So I'm going to show you a little bit of some historic fires. This is up there near Marias Pass around 1900. This is before the 1910 fire. And I'll just show you pictures of what we have is a burned landscape between West Glacier and East Glacier, almost totally in the early 1900s. And that's why they built the snow sheds, for the avalanches. There was no end of trees to hold the snowpack. And right now there hasn't been probably an avalanche down off of that snow shed in the last 50 years because of all the tree growth. So this has the potential right now. Had that Essex fire a few years ago got a wind of it in the back of it and really went, you would have lost all those snow sheds and the holding thing. Those are all creosote snow sheds. Just south of the Big Fork here was that little Daphne Pond. This was taken by Elrod, founder of the biological station in 1902. And that's 110 years later. And today, what it looks like. In 1965, we still had sparse trees on a lot of Averill's Ranch subdivision area up there in land. And right now, it's really coming forested. This Tub fire in 1973 was the last urban interface fire that really threatens homes in the area. And you see where it burned there to the left in 73. And then if you take a 2016 photo, most people could never figure out where that fire even was. So the land really does regenerate quickly. The 1910 fire, those are just big mountain ranges all over the place that burned in 1910. And there was a conference that the Society of American Foresters put on for the 100th anniversary, and collectively the speakers there were asked, could that happen again? To have a 1910 fire event again? And yes and no. We still have prolonged droughts, high temperatures, and strong winds, but we don't have as many free burning fires all over the landscape. And there was some logging and clearing slash that contributed to a lot of starts. But we do have a very unnatural fuel accumulation and buildup where we could see a lot more intense fire due to the fuel loading. You think about 1910, that still had the influence of the Native Americans and lightning that weren't suppressed. So we had a lot less fuel load on a lot of the site then in 1910 than we do today. So this is what it looked like, and now this is what it looks like today. And to me, it's right for reburning. In 1919, there was a fire that went from Missions across Swan Valley to the Bob Marshall. In 21, we had a fire fire start by the dam up here at Lake Fork, went over Swan Hill and went up to Joe Basin in Wolf Creek. And the Swan River School burned down as a result of that. And I had always thought it burned with initial fire spread, but not so. Could it happen again? So August 11th is when the fire started and went up and went to 2,500 acres. And then August 18th, they had a rain event and the season was over. You know, fire. And then September 2nd, the Swan River School burned down. So really, the fire headed northwest, headed southwest towards the Swan River School. That is a very unusual event in this area. Almost all of our fires go from the southwest to the northeast, generally. So that's why I built on the east side of Flathead Lake. That lake's a buffer for me. Let's see. Yeah, so we've got, unless you've managed, certain places, we've got things. 26, this is a 40-acre clearing. We would all been killed. When you have a large, intense fire with a lot of energy coming at you, you need a tremendous area to be safe in. The Half Moon Fire in 29 burned from between Whitefish and Columbia Falls up through to Nyack. So this is backfiring from the town of Columbia Falls. But look at the sparse vegetation that supported that fire up Peak Kettle. It doesn't have much. This is Apgar, and it changed that towards geological. So it went 8 miles that one night there, and it spotted for up to a mile in front of it. So these are all local historic fires. Then it rained. It rained on the fire there, and they thought everything was out. But then in the fall, they had a fire in the Swan that went 6 miles in October. So we sometimes will get an October dry spell that will throw fire around again. This is looking down towards Summers Bay at the lakeside area in 34, but the lakeside wasn't there. That's the same picture. We had our district ranger here on the Swan Lake District killed by a snag on a control burn in 1953 up on Great Mountain. I just want to show this. We had lots of fires in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and almost no fires for acreage burned on the Flathead Forest from the 30s till about the 1980s. It was a wet period. I remember working timber and being wet all summer long, and we didn't have any fires. But now we kind of backed into the fire cycle again. So just to, fire history a little bit. So this is hard to perceive because it takes decades for the forest to change that significantly. Let's see. I'm just going to go through here to the very end in this 2 minutes I got. So this is good. Okay. So, 2003 was a kind of a year where we had lots of acreage burned in Glacier Park, and we were, saw a lot of fires elsewhere, but we really have been spared in the Big Fork area here for being directly involved with fire. We've seen some of them on the horizon, some of the columns way up in Glacier Park, but we really haven't experienced too much here. That's because our fire department here, is really good at putting out these little fires before they get big, and we've done a good job doing that. And this isn't too hard to do because it's got access and it's been managed. The Blue Bay fire last summer had a potential, but there were some reasons why that didn't get real big. But anyway, that had potential. see a lot of frequent low severity fire in the drier habitat types in lower valley bottoms, mixed severity between that and the moist regimes, and then infrequent high fire severity like where you've got wet conditions. But that's the kind of fuel loading we've got now on our drier types. So we've changed that from a low severity potential fire to a high severity potential fire. So one thing that really concerns me is the alignment that we have over the north end of Crane Mountain, where we get winds off the lake that funnel through the canyon there by Woods Bay, and we've got a lot of fuel loading in there. So the Ferndale folks are, to me, a lot more in a jeopardous position for fire vulnerability than are the people in Woods Bay and on the East Shore, because that's the direction that the wind fire tends to want to go. So in 1990, we didn't have any homes in that section, and now we do. So we've got our job cut out for us, and I'm really curious to see how these three guys are going to take care of all that. I'm retired.
So Rick is obviously a wealth of knowledge. I don't know anybody else in the valley who does what Rick does as far as compiling and collecting photos and fire history. He has presented many, many times, many, many places, and I sure hope he will continue to do so. We're going to take just seconds as Sean switches out for the next presentation, and I'm going to set the timer here. We have a clock to watch. We could talk all night about fire, so I'm doing you a favor.
Is that right?
Nope. We just need to go to the beginning. So that'll be, give me the 2-minute warning after that. Okay, so I usually like to start. Again, this is sort of the education part of things, and just a little bit of a recap what Rick was talking about, the ecology. Sometimes I like to just close my eyes and imagine, like he was saying, those lightning strikes in the spring, the summer, how fire used to just move across the landscape and burn. No boundaries, no structures, no roads, no power lines. It would go out when it ran out of fuel. It would go out when the weather changed. That's the environment that we have chosen to live in, right? So we know that the western larch that Rick made reference to, the Douglas fir, the ponderosa pine, the lodgepole, these are all forest trees that have adapted with fire. All right, so what's happened? Rick alluded to suppression, and this is really, really very generalized. But generally speaking, yeah, we've been putting out fires, and we have an accumulation of forest fuels out there. These are factors influencing the position we find ourselves in today. We are in a changing climate, and like Rick just said, we may have had decades of sort of those cooler, wetter years, and now we're sort of in this swing where conditions are a little hotter, a little drier, and we're seeing, fire managers are seeing longer fire seasons, more intense conditions. So it is cyclical, but we are trending towards longer fire seasons and more large fires. What else do we have? Well, we have us. Yeah? Look at these folks. They're picking out their spot. It's wonderful. Let's build our home right here. A bunch of matchsticks. So this is what we're moving into. Again, very generally speaking. Also, wildfire moves a lot faster than you think sometimes. I think when we think about fire, if anybody looked at the map last season and you saw fires all around us, right? But we didn't a little bit of wind, they dry up again, they're still dry. So we have our grass fire season in the spring before green up. And what happens? Over in Preston, somebody's doing a good job, they're debris burning, the wind picks up. So this is a small fire, but it's a grass fire. It's moving quickly, and now it's threatening structures. So it's not necessarily that large fire that is going to destroy your home. But what we need to be concerned about are those small fires as well. Okay, so very, very briefly, very briefly, the fire behavior trend. So when we're talking about fire behavior and what produces conditions that would create large fires, we're looking at fuels, weather, and topography. And Rick alluded to this in his presentation. So when we're talking about fuels, we're talking about fuel loading. We're talking about continuity, both horizontally and vertically on the landscape. How continuous are those fuels? What's the moisture of those fuels? What are we looking at? When we say fuels, you know we're talking grass, brush, timber. When we talk wildland fires, we're not talking forest fires. We're talking grass and brush and timber. We're also looking at weather. So, Rick said most of our weather comes from the southwest. All right, those are our winds. Weather encompasses humidity, encompasses our temperatures. It's what's happening on a daily basis. It's what's happening on a seasonal basis. And then we also have topography. So, like his last slide showed, we're looking at slopes, we're looking at drainages, we're looking at north-facing slopes that get a little bit more, a little less sun, a little less drying, different fuels, different forest types, generally speaking. So when we look at these things and we put them in alignment, so we have really dry fuels, and we have some really low humidities and some high temperatures, and now we've got some steep slopes or some drainages that funnel that weather, those winds. That's what we're looking at. That's when we have maybe a red flag warning. Does anybody know what a red flag warning is? Okay, good. So that would be it. That would be sort of when these conditions, not all these conditions, but when we have a weather event coming through. Yes? Yes, some sort of a weather event. So when you check your weather or you're listening to the radio and they say red flag today, that's what that means. There's the potential for fire growth. There's potential for fire. Any ignition, any spark off a dragging chain, any spark has the potential to become a large fire. Speaking very generally. All right, so forest structure. I like to cover this. I see two things here. I see what we call surface fuels down here on the ground. What we call ladder fuels, so fuels that allow a fire to travel from the ground into the crowns of the trees. So generally speaking, that's our forest structure. And then I also see in this first picture, this might be now, it's kind of wet. We can have an ignition and it's probably not going to do very much. Our firefighters are going to catch that fire pretty easily. Maybe it's June, maybe it's July, maybe it's August. And now we have the same ignition, but now the fuel moistures are much lower and that fire can grow bigger faster. So that's what I see. This is also why when we talk about managing forests and we focus a lot on fuels, because this is the only thing that we can really affect, right? The other thing is not all fire is the same. So if you, we're gonna skip that one. Sorry. Well, we could. I think what we often see is this, right? That's what we see on the news. Those are the stories that are covered. It's flames, it's raging, it's newsworthy. It absolutely is. And it affects people. It really does. But a lot of our fires are small fires, grass fires, shrub fires. They're caught. But it also shows you how fires spread. Again, how we can manage the fuels. Fires also spread by embers. So in addition to a fire just sort of burning across the landscape, each fire has embers and firebrands associated So I think okay, there we are. Good. So what we have, fire spread, we have a column, right? And that column there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of heat, and it is taking pieces of pine cone and branches and sticks, and it is lofting those up into the air. And now, say there's a wind, either a wind from weather or a wind generated by the fire itself, and it's launching those firebrands out ahead of the fire, so you can see spot fires. Oftentimes, a fire can grow very quickly because of spot fires. Especially in those conditions that we talked about, when the fuels are really dry and any source of ignition is going to start a new fire. It's also why when we make recommendations on what you do around your home and your property, that you are preparing for embers and firebrands. So Sean, this is a video. Sean?
Heading that way.
Okay. Hit the picture on the left, please. So there's a hyperlink to a video. This is a lab setting. So there's the Institute of Business and Home Safety, and they have a turntable where they build a structure, and they build it of different materials, and then they have an ember generator where they just shovel in mulch, and they fire embers at this structure, and they say, okay, well, what material burns? What size screen do we need to keep those embers out? What kind of landscaping around the home is best? And if we don't have a video, that's fine too. So that's the picture on the left. On the right is, it was a fire up in Canada a couple years ago, that big one, Fort McMurray. So somebody's evacuating in Fort McMurray. And it's simply to show this is a lab setting and this is a real world setting. So they're not exaggerating. So that's something that we really need to consider when we're looking at that space around our home and on our property. It's not showing. Don't worry about it. It's okay. He can see it, but we can't see it. That's okay. We'll move on. If anybody's interested, I have all kinds of links and information. In fact, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but this is my house. I live up on Foothill Road, east of town, cedar siding. And when we talk about where embers land, when they blow around like a blizzard, yeah, this is snow from this past winter. And I literally looked up and I said, it's true. It really does just that. It's the little cracks and the crevices that we need to worry about, because you are going to be in a blizzard of embers that get stuck in the nooks and the crannies, and when they accumulate, that's what has the potential to start a home on fire. So what do? We have a little bit of reformatting to do, but what do? We look at making our homes fire resistant, ignition resistant. So we look at the roof, we look at okay. So we're looking at a roof, we're using asphalt shingles, we're using metal, like a lot of us do. You don't see a lot of cedar shake houses around here.
Yes.
Okay. That's actually, I need myself 2 extra minutes. So we're looking at construction. We're looking at how do we make our own home resistant to ignition. And I have handouts and information, so we're going to cover this really quick, but there's a lot more information. We can talk afterwards if you've got questions. So we look at the home itself, and then we look at the home ignition zone. So our physical fire scientist, Jack Cohen, down in Missoula, has done a lot of work on this, and he's looking at that first 100 feet out around your home. And again, we're coming back to fuels. How do we modify the fuels around our home? So what's really important is that first 30 feet, including a 0 to 5 foot non-combustible perimeter, because that's where all those embers are going to swirl around and accumulate. So raking, sweeping, cleaning out gutters, any place where you're going to have leaves and needles accumulating, baking I really wish I would have done that. So that's the important part. And then we're looking at just a few trees. We have a lot of conifers here, but start planting some broadleaf trees that are generally higher moisture, still provide shade, but don't ignite as readily. Then we move out 30 to 100 foot. So again, modifying limbing and pruning trees, taking down some trees so you're increasing the spacing in between the crowns. Like we talked about a little bit ago, how does fire move across the landscape? We're going to break up the fields a little bit. And a lot of people have acres. You might have 1 acre, 3 acres, 200 acres. We get calls all the time about people wanting to know what they can do. So this is, a lot of us have that benefit of some space. So you can manage your space. And then if you've got acres, then you look 100 to 200 feet out and you just sort of keep doing that work. The more aggressive you are, the better. And what does this do? I put this on here. Defensible or survivable space means that you can leave your home, you can leave it undefended, and it'll still survive a wildfire. So we're creating room for equipment and firefighters if they can respond. We're decreasing the fire intensity around our homes. We're opening up the canopy and we're allowing helicopters and airplanes to be more effective with their water and retardant. So we've got a few different reasons to do this. So these are just examples of folks who have done a little bit of work in thinning in that home ignition zone. These are local examples. You know, they're incorporating some stone, some short grass, thinned out the trees, some hardscaping. So again, knowing what you know about embers, knowing what you know about how homes can ignite, having some rock and some stone around your home is probably a good idea. Some irrigation, things like some outdoor entertaining space, nice stone patios, some rock steps. So just a few concepts. All right, shifting gears, we're looking outside that home ignition zone. Again, you've got acres, and now you're thinking, how do I manage my forest? I just want to say that the DNRC, I work with and for a service forester, and his job is to serve you. So you've got questions about your forest, and he is available, call him up, to take a look and start putting together a management plan, identifying insects and disease, because we think that when we are recommending selectively removing fuels around your place, let's start with some insects and disease and some forest health. Let's talk about how you want to manage your forest. So these are examples again from this Big Fork area, River State Park. You know, we just went for a walk the other day and we noticed, wow, these trees are absolutely debarked. What is going on here? Have you guys been down there? Have you seen this around here? So it's a flat-headed wood borer. So he gets out his axe and he takes off a little bark and he does a little diagnosis, and sure enough, the flat-headed wood borer. So anyway, if you've got some property and some trees and you're curious about what's going on, that's Rick. We also have the Northwest Montana Hazardous Fuels Program, and these folks have the cost share funding available to help you do some thinning around your home and your property. 75-25 cost share right now. So you're looking to treat some fuels, you want to find a contractor, contact these folks and they can help you through that process. So usually the 3 to 5 acres around your building or the access and egress getting in and out of your property. The other thing I like to encourage folks is to do some work around your home and your properties. Anybody like to burn piles? Burn brush, burn? This is a good crowd. So when did burn permit season start?